one of the concerns that came up a lot in the discussions about the comprehensive plan update regarded the multi-use, and that it's been primarily single use. And I know that, for example, in the Union Corridor, we're not seeing it in Lakewood, although we do see it in other parts of Colorado and Denver, where we have the commercial on the bottom and the housing on top. And I've heard from staff that they haven't been attracting those developers, even though they do exist. And I also understand that it could be within a certain region, right? We have housing in one area, we have grocery stores in another area, we have businesses, so that it can be walkable. But I think unless we define a boundary, and I didn't see any discussion about that, and that came up consistently by a lot of folks in these meetings, and I didn't see it in the draft, and I didn't see it in the zoning, which we'll talk about later. But I think that's a really important piece, is to define the boundaries within those areas, because we can get Solterra after Solterra, or big 300-plex apartment buildings all lined up. I just passed what used to be the old Target on the way to Lowe's today, and this is just a lot of buildings, but where's the grocery store? And so I think supporting area planning in a city and the walkability goals, unless we can define, we're going to infill everything with housing, and we're not going to have grocery stores, and that's going to force everybody to have cars, and it's totally against the walkable neighborhoods. It's just against, it's so contradictory to many of the goals that are listed here. So I guess that's maybe one of my most significant concerns or feedback, is that we don't fill in everything with just housing, that we need to create this community. And we did have some comments that came in that talked about neighborhood mom and pop stores, so that you can walk or you can bike to the store to get groceries. And I feel like there hasn't been enough focus on food, which is so critical for folks. And we're never going to deal with the car problem unless we deal with having food, restaurants, and whatnot intermixed within these neighborhoods. So really hope you'll take that into consideration, because it seemed to be lacking.
We've touched, a few of us tonight, on this topic of can you walk to a grocery store, walkable neighborhoods? Do we have commercial amenities nearby? I thought there was a very thoughtful comment by someone on Lakewood Speaks, just about small corner stores, right, and being able to walk to that. I think, I would have appetite in the right places and context, maybe to, allowing in a residential zone district, an appropriately small-scaled, neighborhood serving commercial store, and maybe, the commenter was talking about a corner lot, having a small store in every neighborhood, right? And he put a lot of restrictions around it, but I just liked that he just made so much sense, right? Maybe it literally has to be on a corner lot. Maybe you could even go so far as to say it has to be on a corner lot, on a collector street or something, right? But it can be a commercial space allowed within the residential zone. You probably no more than X square feet. You want to keep it a neighborhood serving commercial. Really minimize the maximum number of parking spaces allowed there, right? Don't go overboard with the parking. Have good design standards so that the building is identifiably commercial, but in keeping with the otherwise residential character around it. When you talk about things like just design standards and architectural standards, minimizing the lighting. But if you do all those things, I think you can get to a place where, some of these, small scale commercial buildings can be integrated into corner lots and neighborhoods, and kind of enhance that walkability naturally in a way that's different than having to rely on building a very urban mid-form large building with ground store retail and housing above. If we get that, that's great. But in other contexts in our city where it's more this low form residential, mixing in some of that commercial, I think just being allowed is something that could do a lot for the the walkability goals in the comp plan.
Specifically on the issue of more allowance for storefront businesses, I was going to comment on this as well myself, which was I found that very exciting and very interesting, and fundamentally returning us to more of the notion of the village, where people do not have to drive everywhere. They can go get a quart of milk. They can go to their veterinarian. They can go do the things that they want to do in a more walkable way. I think it is, personally, it is one of the great tragedies of Euclidean zoning that those have been wiped out in reverence for single-family only exclusive neighborhoods.
Yeah, thank you. My light's been on since the earlier discussion about the corner shops. I had wanted to comment on that, and certainly I found it very compelling, both in terms of the comments that we had received as the commission, but also in relation to the lower form density. So for example, and I can go back to my own neighborhood, so many of us have gardens and we have excess, and so a lot of times we set up that, we'll share, we'll have a certain place, or, even when I had chickens, which they all got killed by hawks or foxes or whatnot, but I had them for a good run, about 5 years, and I always had extra eggs, and I would, give those away. And we really have a big sustainability and backyard gardening community in my neighborhood and in that vicinity, and having that corner house where somebody could sell their excess eggs or lettuce or whatever would be great. So I guess my question, I was really curious that when you spoke with the comp team, they said mid-form and not low form. I would personally really like to see that in the low form for sustainability. And, we would walk, we would ride our bikes. It worked really well. We've had a lot of gatherings like seed sharings and various events. So I'm really interested to hear from the comp plan staff, what are the barriers to low form? Okay, well, I would appreciate some consideration and maybe some feedback, because I think to have a little corner grocery store within the neighborhood, I think folks, would potentially be supportive. And I have seen some comments, a number of comments that folks feel that, changing the zoning is a pretty big deal, and they'd like to have a little bit more time to consider, and maybe as you finalize the comp plan, it's been helpful to feed into both, to have both, but to take a little bit more time and maybe do a little bit more outreach. And speaking to Commissioner Kochmeyer's, maybe we want to look at some changes that are not, were not envisioned in the original, and perhaps this could be one of them. And I can't say that everybody would support it, but I think there could be a lot of support for it, and it would be worth reaching out and looking into.
We've talked about two aspirational things, right? Which is everybody wants the walkable neighborhood, and the corner store. It seems like that's everybody, maybe an exaggeration, but it seems like that's a common desire. And another desire that is maybe not as universal, but is true, which is the idea to how do we instill more density. So I had a quick question. Going back to something you were asking about, which is there a particular reason not to allow a zoning that is a 0 lot size? I understand what you were saying about the ways in which to use lots as they are, and because what I guess I'm getting at, I'll be quick about what I'm getting at and then ask the question again. Because the reason the corner stores and a lot of the mixed use don't work is if you look up just the basic standards of the number of DU per acre you need to support a store, other than little pockets throughout those areas, we just don't have the density. And so you need the density. If that's really what we want, the walkable neighborhoods, you need more people. We just simply don't have it. And so if that's really what we all believe we want, you have to allow what you're saying we want, which is the density. That said,